The thick mahogany door slammed shut, echoing the finality of my professional execution. Effective immediately, Anya. We regret to inform you that your position has been eliminated due to performance inconsistencies and, frankly, a lack of professional judgment. Mr. Sterling's voice was cold, flat, and devoid of the professional camaraderie he'd extended to me for 5 years. I could taste the metallic tang of betrayal at the back of my throat. My vision tunneled past his shoulder through the glass wall of the conference room and landed on the person who mattered most. My sister, Melanie. She was sitting at my desk which I had earned through relentless 12-hour days, sipping coffee from my favorite mug, the one Ben had given me last Christmas. Her head was tilted back slightly, her smile wide and predatory, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph washing over her face. She hadn't even waited for the body to cool before staking her claim. My chest seized, not from shock, but from the immediate blinding certainty that she had orchestrated this entire dismissal. She had been the unnamed source in the malicious, fabricated report that led to this meeting. I felt the blood rush from my face, leaving me lightheaded and hollowed out. The world tilted on its axis and all I could focus on was the arrogant curve of her mouth. My hands clenched into fists inside the pockets of my tailored blazer, digging sharp crescents into my palms. My breath hitched, a silent, trapped scream vibrating behind my teeth. What the hell just happened to her? I am Anya Hayes, and this is the story of how my sister stole my life, piece by calculated piece, and how I gathered the wreckage and used it to take back everything she thought she had won. It all started 7 months ago, back when I still believed in the concept of an unbreakable sisterly bond. Melanie had moved back to the city after a messy, expensive divorce left her emotionally and financially depleted. I was the older, stable sister, the one with the corner office view at Sterling & Company, the one on the fast track to becoming the youngest vice president in the firm's history. My life was solid. I had my career and I had been the kindest, most grounding man I could imagine. We were planning our wedding, looking at houses and talking about our future. When Melanie needed a lifeline, I threw her one. I pulled strings to get her a temp contract in the administrative department at Sterling & Company, thinking she could slowly rebuild her life. She seemed genuinely grateful, almost subservient, which in hindsight should have been the first warning sign. I remember telling Ben, she just needs a fresh start. We have to look out for family. I saw myself as the savior, the strong one holding the anchor while she rode out the storm. She was the one who needed saving. I was the one who was stable, successful, and secure. That security, I would soon learn, made me a perfect stationary target. The moment I brought her into my perfect world, I handed her the blueprint for its destruction. I had no idea that her gratitude was just a performance, a carefully constructed mask hiding a deep, festering resentment that had been years in the making. The warning signs were small, insidious, and easy to dismiss when you trusted the person delivering the subtle poison. The first strange incident was a crucial client file that somehow went missing right before a major pitch. I scrambled, found it misfiled under a defunct project name, and barely salvaged the presentation. I blamed the overwhelmed admin staff. Then the shift in my personal life began. Ben started canceling our evening dates, citing Melanie needing emotional support. She was always calling him tearful and fragile, needing a ride or just a shoulder. "She's fragile, Anya," he'd explain, his brow furrowed with sympathy. "You're the strong one, you understand." That phrase, "you're the strong one," became a mantra, a weapon she wielded without him knowing. It meant I was the one who could be neglected, who could handle the lack of attention. A sliver of resentment, sharp and cold, began to grow, but I crushed it down. She was family and family came first. I told myself I was being selfish, jealous even. But the subtle shift in Ben's focus, the way his eyes always held a distant, worried look when he spoke of her, made my stomach clench. It wasn't just my time she was stealing. It was my emotional space, slowly and surely eroding the foundation of my most important relationship. The promotion snub was the first public professional blow that I couldn't rationalize away. 3 weeks ago, the official announcement for the vice president spot was made. My name wasn't on the memo. It went to a junior colleague, a nice enough guy, but someone whose portfolio was half the size of mine. I was called into Mr. Sterling's office immediately afterward. He looked genuinely uncomfortable shuffling papers. He cited minor procedural errors in my recent quarterly reports and a perceived lack of team cohesion as the reasons for passing me over. I was stunned into silence. My reports were not only flawless, they were triple-checked. I lived for perfection. When I returned to my desk, Melanie was waiting, leaning against the cubicle wall with a look of clumsy, saccharine concern. She patted my arm, a touch that felt condescending, not comforting. "Oh sis, I'm so sorry. That's just terrible. Better luck next time though." Her words were hollow, but her eyes, those beautiful familiar green eyes, held a flicker of something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction, quickly masked by a practiced frown. That flicker, that split-second lapse in her performance, ignited a tiny cold spark of suspicion in my gut. I started replaying every small error, every misplaced document, every late report. They weren't random. They were orchestrated, and she was the only common denominator. The fatal lunch was yesterday the final desperate act of my own trust. Melanie had been unusually attentive since the promotion snub, asking about my upcoming presentation to the board. A high-stakes proposal that involved months of confidential proprietary research and projected a massive expansion into the European market. She insisted we go out just to catch up. Foolishly, desperately wanting to believe in my sister, I took the bait. Over lukewarm soup and stale bread, I ran through my slides, explaining the confidential data, the unique methodologies, and the financial projections. I watched her, searching for the slightest hint of distraction, but she listened intently, nodding in all the right places, her expression one of rapt, sisterly support. Her phone rested face down beside her plate, a deliberate gesture of attention that now screams duplicity. I remember thinking how supportive she finally seemed, how maybe the stress of her divorce had just made me paranoid. I was an open book, reading my most valuable secrets aloud to the wolf. I laid out the entire blueprint of my professional success, handing her the intellectual property that was the culmination of my entire career at Sterling and Company. When we parted ways, she hugged me tightly, whispering, "You're going to nail it, Anya." That hug felt like a Judas kiss. It was the last time I would ever willingly trust her, and the memory of my own blind faith now burns hotter than any anger. Now, standing in the empty cubicle aisle, clutching the flimsy cardboard box containing 5 years of my life, a stress ball, a framed photo of Ben and me, a couple of dead office plants, I watched Melanie glide into Mr. Sterling's office. She didn't knock. She was already home. The unfairness was a crushing physical weight that made my knees tremble. As I swept the last few pathetic items from the bottom of my desk drawer, my fingers brushed against something metallic and cold, taped securely underneath the surface of the wood. It was small, rectangular, and heavy. I paused, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. I peeled the adhesive away, revealing a cheap, black plastic burner phone. It felt like a relic from a bad spy movie, out of place in the pristine corporate environment. Why would Melanie, the woman who had just replaced me, leave this behind? It was a sick, cold realization that hit me instantly. She was so arrogant in her victory that she had forgotten her tool of destruction. This phone was hers. I slipped it into the inner pocket of my blazer, the plastic casing hot against my thigh, a silent, heavy promise of future vengeance already forming in the vast, empty space where my career used to be. The moment the phone touched my skin, the grieving stopped and the calculating began. I drove home in a fog, ignoring the persistent buzz of Ben's calls and texts. I couldn't face his sympathy right now. It felt tainted by Melanie's manipulation. I parked the car, walked into the quiet solitude of our apartment, and went straight to the kitchen. I plugged the burner phone into the charger I usually used for my own work phone, watching the tiny red light glow. The anticipation was excruciating. This wasn't just evidence. This was the key to understanding the depth of the rot. I waited 30 minutes, pacing the length of the living room carpet before I couldn't stand it anymore. I picked it up. It booted up instantly, demanding no password. Melanie's sheer arrogance was astounding. She assumed the phone would be found by a cleaning crew and trashed, never suspecting I would be the one to find her secret. The screen was stark, almost empty, containing only the basic phone functions and one third-party app. A secure, encrypted messaging client with a generic, unidentifiable icon. My hand shook slightly as I tapped the icon. The screen filled with hundreds of messages, neatly categorized by contact. The first contact name I saw sent a jolt of icy clarity through me. The Fixer. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air burning my lungs. This wasn't just casual gossip. This was a conspiracy. I scrolled quickly through the messages exchanged with the fixer. They were dated, precise, and utterly damning. The first few messages were logistical, confirming payments and timelines. Then I found the thread detailing the professional sabotage. My eyes scanned the screen, absorbing the toxic reality of my sister's malice. The language was cold, technical, and utterly devoid of emotion, making the betrayal feel even more clinical and cruel. Asterisk, I planted the file in Anya's folder. Make sure the audit flags it by Friday. Use the old account name so it looks like a legacy error. Asterisk, I read the text twice, the words searing themselves into my memory. This confirmed it. The procedural errors that cost me the VP promotion were manufactured. She wasn't just competing with me, she was dismantling me from the inside out. The next message sent a shockwave through me, connecting the dots of the fatal lunch. Asterisk, Sterling is buying it. He thinks the procedural errors are random. I'll send the proprietary research tonight. Use the secure Dropbox. Asterisk, she hadn't just sabotaged my job. She had stolen my intellectual property and sold it to a competitor, likely the fixer. The betrayal was agonizing, but the pain was quickly being overwritten by a cold, sharp clarity. The professional betrayal was agonizing, but the next thread I opened delivered a far deeper, more personal stab. This thread was labeled Ben's mom. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. I had always struggled to connect with Ben's mother, Mrs. Sterling, no relation to my boss, who was traditional and reserved. I scrolled through the messages, horrified by the systematic character assassination Melanie had been performing. They weren't friendly exchanges. They were vicious, calculated complaints about me. Asterisk, Anya is too career-focused, Mrs. S. She doesn't prioritize Ben. She's too cold and never wants to start a family right away. She cares more about her spreadsheets than her fiancé. Asterisk, Melanie was painting herself as the supportive, nurturing, familial alternative, the woman Ben should be with. I realized why Ben had been so distant, so easily swayed by Melanie's neediness. She wasn't just stealing my job, she was poisoning my most important relationship, subtly eroding the trust and affection Ben's family had for me. The insidious nature of this betrayal, attacking my worth as a partner and future daughter-in-law, made the corporate theft seem almost benign. She wasn't just trying to win, she was trying to ensure I lost everything, leaving me isolated and unloved. My hands were shaking now, not from fear but from a terrifying, sustained rage. I scrolled further, bracing myself, knowing that if she was willing to destroy my career and my relationship, there was no line she wouldn't cross. I found a long, detailed thread addressed to a contact named Arthur Finch. Finch was a lawyer specializing in estate law, known locally for his aggressive, often questionable tactics in fast-tracking probate cases. This was the gut punch that transformed my anger into a protective fury. The messages detailed a scheme involving our frail 80-year-old grandmother, Alara, who was living in assisted care and suffering from early-stage dementia. She's confused most of the time. We need the power of attorney transferred to me before Anya realizes the trust fund is being liquidated. Keep Anya focused on her job drama. She won't look up until it's too late. This wasn't about a job anymore. This was about financial elder abuse and stealing our family legacy, money that was intended to pay for Alara's long-term care and be split equally between us. The sheer scale of her long-game manipulation was staggering. She had used my professional crisis as a smokescreen to commit a far greater crime against the one person in our family who was truly vulnerable. The panic I felt was immediately overridden by a cold, sharp resolve. I was no longer seeking revenge. I was seeking justice for Alara. I didn't cry. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford, and I knew deep down that tears were exactly what Melanie expected. Tears were weakness, and Melanie fed on weakness. Instead, a glacial, terrifying calm settled over me. My hands, which had been shaking with rage, steadied. I moved to my laptop, my movements precise and deliberate, like a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. I connected the burner phone via a secure data transfer cable and began the process of extracting and cataloging every single file, every message, every timestamp. I created a secure, encrypted drive, naming the folder The Truth. I organized the data into 3 critical categories: corporate theft, Sterling and Company, personal sabotage, Ben's family, and financial fraud, Alara's trust. I realized my revenge couldn't be a spontaneous outburst. It had to be methodical, logical, and irrefutable. I wasn't going to just expose her. I was going to hand her entire life back to her, dismantled and labeled piece by piece. I needed to know every detail of her operation, every player involved, and every weakness she possessed. The most crucial weakness, I realized, was her own unshakable arrogance. The belief that she was smarter than everyone else, including me. I decided then that I would let her continue to believe she had won, fattening her up for the kill. Ben came home late that evening, his face etched with concern, immediately filling the silence with his worried voice. "Anya, I'm so sorry about the job. Melanie told me how unfair they were, saying you were being scapegoated by Sterling." He rushed to embrace me, but I kept my body stiff, forcing a small, fragile smile that felt like a painful contortion. I watched him closely, searching for doubt, for any flicker of suspicion about his favorite sister, but saw only genuine, heartbreaking sympathy. He was completely blind to her manipulation, a victim of her calculated performance. I couldn't tell him the truth yet. If I revealed the burner phone and the evidence now, he would be forced to choose, and Melanie would spin the narrative that I was acting out of wounded pride and professional jealousy. I needed him to trust her for a little longer, to let her feel secure in her conquest. "It's fine, Ben," I whispered, leaning into his shoulder but keeping my mind miles away. "I just need some space to process this. It's a huge shock." The lie tasted like ash. Lying to Ben, the man I loved, was the hardest part of this entire ordeal, but I knew if I moved too soon, the evidence would be dismissed and Melanie would escape accountability. I needed the final unveiling to be so overwhelming and public that she couldn't possibly deny it. The next morning, my calculated campaign began. I started with the missing link, Arthur Finch. I spent hours researching the estate lawyer mentioned in the burner phone messages, cross-referencing his known clients and legal precedents. His digital footprint confirmed my suspicions. He specialized in high-speed, aggressive transfers of assets, often involving elderly or infirm clients. He was Melanie's hired gun, the one who would finalize the theft of Alara's trust. I realized that the texts alone, while powerful, could be dismissed as digital fabrication by a clever lawyer. I needed a paper trail, something physical and undeniable, connecting Finch directly to Melanie's scheme beyond the burner phone. I needed evidence that she was actively engaging in the transaction, not just talking about it. The messages indicated they were meeting soon to sign the final papers concerning Grandma Alara's power of attorney. I had to find out when and where that meeting would take place, and I had to be there to document it. I rechecked the burner phone's calendar, knowing Melanie, in her haste and arrogance, might have used it for scheduling. And there it was, stark and simple, Finch 3 p.m., the Blue Heron. I knew Melanie was arrogant enough to believe she was untouchable, especially since she had just succeeded in destroying my career. The Blue Heron was a secluded, high-end restaurant notorious for its private backrooms and discreet business lunches. The perfect place for a shady lawyer and a deceitful sister to finalize a fraudulent transfer of assets. I immediately called the restaurant, feigning a last-minute business meeting, and booked a quiet corner booth for 2:45 p.m. on Friday, strategically placing myself far enough away to avoid detection but close enough to capture irrefutable proof. The hours leading up to Friday were spent perfecting my disguise. I wasn't trying to be unrecognizable, just unremarkable. I wore oversized, dark sunglasses, a neutral trench coat, and pulled my hair back severely, adopting the bland, hurried look of a wealthy executive who wished to remain invisible. I bought a high-resolution camera small enough to fit discreetly in my purse, practicing angles and quick shots in the privacy of my apartment. My heart pounded a steady, cold rhythm. This was no longer just about anger. It was about precision. I felt like a character in a thriller, but the stakes were terrifyingly real. My grandmother's future and the complete vindication of my own sanity. I had to be perfect. Friday afternoon arrived, a crisp, sunny day that felt utterly incongruous with the dark task at hand. I arrived at the Blue Heron precisely at 2:45 p.m., settling into my corner booth with a notebook and a bottle of sparkling water, affecting the air of someone waiting patiently for a late client. At 3 p.m. sharp, Melanie walked in. She was radiating confidence, dressed in a sharp, expensive suit that screamed success. a stark contrast to the temp clothes she wore 7 months ago. She greeted Arthur Finch with a wide, professional smile, shaking his hand with exaggerated warmth. Finch, a slick man with a predatory gaze, led her to a small, isolated table. I watched, my camera ready, concealed beneath a napkin. They immediately got down to business. Melanie leaned in, her body language conspiratorial. She pulled a thick manila envelope from her expensive designer handbag and slid it across the table to Finch. It was clearly marked "Power of Attorney." I didn't hesitate. I snapped several high-resolution photos of the exchange, focusing intently on the documents and the specific damning details of the transaction. The click of the shutter was barely audible over the restaurant's ambient jazz, but to me it sounded like a gunshot. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. They were efficient, cold, and entirely focused on the transaction. I continued to observe, capturing multiple angles of Melanie signing documents and Finch counting through a wad of bills, presumably his retainer for the fast-tracked fraud. As they finished, Melanie stood up, her triumph almost palpable. She was so consumed by her success that she became careless. She checked her expensive designer handbag, ensuring her main phone was secure. But as she adjusted the strap, she pulled out something else. A small, crumpled piece of paper that fluttered silently to the plush carpet. She didn't notice. Finch didn't notice. They exchanged final, satisfied words and walked toward the exit, leaving the small, unassuming piece of paper behind. My pulse quickened. I waited until the maitre d' had cleared their table and the coast was clear, then I casually walked over, pretending to adjust my shoe. I scooped up the paper. It was a simple receipt for a cash purchase from a prepaid phone store downtown, dated 7 months prior, the very day Melanie moved back to the city. The item purchased, basic prepaid device. Proof of intent, proof of purchase, and a perfect paper trail connecting her to the burner phone she'd left under my desk. The physical evidence was now secured, linking the digital proof to the real-world crime. I had the burner phone data, the photos of the fraudulent meeting with Finch, and the receipt proving she bought the device specifically for this scheme. The next day I focused on the emotional linchpin, Grandma Alara. Melanie had been extremely possessive of Alara recently, insisting she was too confused for visitors and needed quiet. I ignored Melanie's strict instructions and went directly to the assisted living facility. When I sat beside Alara's bed, her eyes were clear, lucid, and filled with a fragile anxiety. She wasn't entirely confused, she was scared. "Melanie keeps asking me to sign things, dear," she whispered, her frail hand gripping mine tightly. "She says it's for my comfort care, but I don't trust her. She looks at the papers like she's already spent the money." The physical confirmation of Melanie's deceit was chilling. I spent an hour with Alara, carefully explaining the situation without causing undue alarm. I then called a trusted independent solicitor, brought him to the facility, and had Alara sign a new notarized statement revoking any previous power of attorney and confirming Melanie's pressure. The paper trail was now watertight, protecting Alara and cementing Melanie's downfall. With the evidence compiled, the secure drive holding the burner phone data, the receipt, the damning photos of the meeting with Finch, and Alara's notarized statement, I shifted my focus to the delivery system. I didn't go to the police or the company yet. If I involved law enforcement, the entire matter would become bureaucratic and dragged out, allowing Melanie to hire expensive lawyers and muddy the waters. The truth needed to be delivered not in a sterile courtroom, but where it would cause the maximum emotional, social, and professional damage. I decided the revelation had to happen in front of the people she needed to impress, the people whose approval she craved most. Our family, Ben, and most importantly her new colleagues at Sterling and Company, including Mr. Sterling himself. I needed to ensure her destruction was immediate and total. I spent hours organizing the evidence into a streamlined chronological presentation, converting the text messages and photos into large, easily readable slides. I practiced my movements, ensuring I could execute the plan quickly and silently. I was calm, collected, and utterly ruthless. The final piece of the puzzle arrived via text message from Ben. An invitation to a small, intimate gathering at my parents' house this Sunday. The message was casually worded, but the underlying intention was clear. It was an engagement party for them. Ben hadn't proposed to me yet, but the burner phone had revealed his plan to end our relationship and proposed to Melanie, who he now viewed as his supportive rock. Melanie had organized this event, specifically inviting my former colleagues, including Mr. Sterling, to rub her success in my face and solidify her place in the family hierarchy. The pain of this realization was sharp and intense, but it also served as the final necessary catalyst. This was the stage. This was the moment she had engineered to finalize her victory over me, and I would use it to deliver her defeat. I responded to Ben with a simple, polite acceptance, feigning a slightly wounded but supportive sister. I needed her to believe I was defeated, that I was coming merely to witness her triumph. I prepared the presentation onto a single slim flash drive, knowing that the moment I plugged it in, her perfect life would shatter. Sunday arrived, bright and cruel. The backyard of my childhood home was filled with the familiar, happy chatter of family and friends. Melanie was radiant in a flowing white cocktail dress, a bridal preview no doubt, with Ben beaming proudly beside her. She looked like the perfect fiancée, the golden daughter. I moved through the crowd quietly, accepting pitying glances and awkward pats on the shoulder from relatives who assumed I was still reeling from the job loss. Melanie spotted me and glided over, her smile too wide, too perfect. "Anya, darling. So glad you could make it. You know, Mr. Sterling is here. Maybe you two can chat about your next steps," she purred, her eyes shining with malicious amusement. I forced a small, weak smile, holding a glass of sparkling water. "I'm just here to celebrate family, Melanie," I replied, my voice steady. I could feel the weight of the flash drive in my blazer pocket, a tiny device holding enough truth to burn down her entire world. I watched her raise a champagne flute, ready to begin her triumphant speech. "To new beginnings," she announced, glancing pointedly at me, basking in the glow of her perceived victory. As Melanie began her smug speech about overcoming adversity and finding her true path, a thinly veiled reference to her manipulation, I slipped quietly toward the media console set up near the patio. It was connected to a large flat-screen TV usually used for family photo slideshows. No one noticed me. All eyes were fixed on the glowing figure of Melanie, who was now talking about the importance of integrity and loyalty. The irony was suffocating. My hands were steady as I plugged the slim flash drive into the console's USB port. The background slideshow of baby photos and vacation snapshots immediately disappeared, replaced by a momentary flash of blue screen. Then the screen displayed the first slide of my presentation. It was stark white with black text enlarged for maximum impact, pulled directly from the burner phone. I planted the file in Anya's folder. "Make sure the audit flags it by Friday." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The happy chatter died instantly, replaced by a terrifying, absolute silence. Melanie's voice hitched mid-sentence. She spun around, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror as she recognized the source and the content. Ben stared at the screen, his smile dissolving into confusion, then shock. The screen didn't linger. It was programmed to cycle every 5 seconds. The next slide showed the text message confirming the theft of my proprietary research. Mr. Sterling, who was standing near the back, instantly recognized the proprietary language. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Melanie let out a strangled cry, dropping her champagne flute, which shattered harmlessly on the patio tiles. She lunged forward, screaming my name, but my father, who had been watching the screen with a look of stunned disbelief, stepped in front of her, holding her back physically. He didn't look at her. He was reading the next slide, which detailed the messages to Ben's mother, maligning my character and painting Melanie as the superior partner. The betrayal was public, visible, and utterly undeniable. The domino effect was catastrophic. The screen cycled relentlessly, delivering blow after blow. The damning photos of Melanie and Arthur Finch at the Blue Heron flashed up, followed by the receipt for the burner phone purchase, linking her directly to the device. The air in the backyard thickened with disbelief and outrage. Ben's face was pale, his eyes wide with a horrific realization as he saw the messages to his mother. He looked from the screen to Melanie, who was now sobbing hysterically, trying to fight past our father. Then came the final, most devastating slide, the thread detailing the liquidation of Alara's trust fund. "The inheritance?" Ben whispered, reading the final damning thread about Grandma Alara, the sheer scale of the fraud sinking in. He looked completely shattered, realizing the woman he was about to propose to was a ruthless, manipulative parasite. Mr. Sterling, his face red with fury, immediately pulled out his phone, already dialing corporate security and demanding an immediate internal investigation into intellectual property theft. Melanie finally broke free of my father's grip and lunged for the media console, intending to rip the flash drive out, but I sidestepped her easily. Her scream was raw, guttural, a sound of pure, impotent rage as she realized her entire life was collapsing in front of her audience. The room was silent except for her frantic denials, which sounded hollow and desperate against the irrefutable evidence displayed on the screen. Ben didn't need to say anything. His expression spoke volumes. He walked toward Melanie not with anger but with a profound final disappointment. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the small velvet ring box he'd been hiding, and without looking at either of us he tossed it into the nearest potted plant, the soft thud a final punctuation mark on their relationship. He walked away from her, heading straight for the house. Mr. Sterling, having finished his call, looked directly at Melanie, now curled on the ground weeping, and stated loud enough for everyone to hear, "You will be hearing from our legal team effective immediately. Do not contact the office again." She had lost her fiancé, her job, and her reputation in 60 seconds, all due to her own documented arrogance. I watched her collapse into a heap of desperate, ugly tears. I didn't feel the sharp, satisfying spike of triumph I had expected. Instead, I felt a deep, profound release. I had exposed the truth, protected my grandmother, and reclaimed my sanity. The noise of the shattered party faded around me. I walked over to Ben, who was standing by the edge of the patio, his shoulders slumped. He looked up, his eyes full of pain and shame. "Anya, he started, his voice cracking. I cut him off gently. "I knew who she was, Ben. I just wanted you to know too." I didn't wait for his apology or his explanation of how easily he had been manipulated. His remorse was his cross to bear, not mine. I simply turned and walked away from the wreckage, leaving the noise, the shattered glass, and the weeping figure of my sister behind me. My career was gone, but my integrity was intact. I walked through the quiet streets, watching the setting sun, knowing that I was finally free. Free from her shadow, free from her lies, and free to build a life where I was valued and safe. I had revealed the truth where it hurt most, and now my story was finally, truly my own.